republicanism, with the major purposes according to the natural rights philosophy. When classical Republicans spoke of the office of citizen, what did they mean? Classical Republican thinkers believed that civic virtue must be learned. Therefore, all young people must receive moral education. Do you agree or disagree, and why? You may begin. When you're ready.
Plato once said, "The city is what it is because our citizens are what they are." Interactions with the citizens and the government forge the strength of a nation. However, the function of this relationship has been discussed on different philosophical grounds.
Classical Republicans held that the purpose of government was to uphold the common good, even at the cost of individual rights. In the Republic, Plato wrote of a society where the common good was upheld above all else. Pericles created an Athenian direct democracy and broke down economic barriers by giving salaries of public officials to the poor. Cicero put forth principles of civic virtue to practice when he opposed Caesar's dictatorship. French philosopher Baron de Montesquieu aimed to uphold civic virtue by separating the branches of government, protecting it from corruption.
In contrast, natural rights theorists held that the purpose of government was to protect individual rights, often defined as life, liberty, and property. Whereas classical republicanism aimed to look at the relationship between people and the government from a communitarian standpoint, natural rights theorists were decidedly more individualistic. John Locke codified these basic individual rights in his 2 treatises on government, discussing social contract theory.
Under the social contract, one enters into society and gives up certain rights, so that fundamental rights will be protected. Under this system, authority of government is derived from the people, a principle known as popular sovereignty. Thomas Jefferson applied ideas from John Locke's social contract when stating that, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
Both philosophies may be found in our government. Keeping with Montesquieu's tradition, the first 3 articles establish separate and co-equal branches. Supreme Court cases like Hawaii Housing Authority versus Midkiff upheld the classical Republican ideal that a state, under eminent domain, may take private land and redistribute its ownership for the common good. Natural rights is found in the Constitution in places like the Fourth Amendment, which grants the right of people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches.
These philosophies also differed on the concept of citizen. Natural rights theorists held that the citizen should hold their government accountable for the protection of fundamental rights. Should the government not uphold the promise, the citizen should demand change and, if need be, rebel, traces of which may be found in the Second Amendment.
Classical Republicans believed that moral education was essential to the creation of a responsible citizenry. As Justice Louis Brandeis said, the most important political office is that of the private citizen. When classical Republicans spoke of the office of the citizen, they meant that the citizen should be politically active and hold civic virtue. Pericles' government emphasized the office of the citizen, stating, "We do not say a man who takes no interest in politics is a man to mind his own business. We say he has no business here at all."
This concept may be found in documents like the 1777 Georgia Constitution, in Article 12, which mandated compulsory voting. Other activities that uphold the classical Republican concept of the citizen today are jury duty and the initiative process. Wisconsin residents have used their office as citizens to ensure the common good of their community by initiating a recall of Governor Scott Walker, who stripped collective bargaining power from the Union.
Our concept of citizens today varies very much with the classical Republican model of it. In Plyler v. Doe, it was ruled that education was a fundamental privilege, affirming that while a person may not be a citizen in legal terms, they may still uphold the classical Republican ideal of a citizen who deserves a moral education.
To ensure the common good was upheld, classical Republicans believed a moral education was necessary in order to ensure a functional society, a concept we agree with.
As John Locke stated, "Of all men we met, 9 parts of 10 are what they are by their education."
Nevada and 33 other states have laws against bullying and require government and civics courses for high school graduation. A moral education is essential to assure that the democratic American institutions are upheld by the civic virtue of its citizens. Thank you. We're now ready for questions.
Can you guys tell me what the difference is, if any, between civic virtue and religious-based morality?
Well, essentially, civic virtue is holding that everyone should do what is good for the whole of the community. It has more political connotations, saying that people should be politically active, get involved in their communities, and help the general well-being. Whereas religious morals are more saying you should believe for the purposes of a higher deity. Although there is some overlap between the two, civic virtue generally falls squarely in the political realm, whereas religious falls in the religious realm.
Also, religious virtue has a more individualistic quality to it. While it's not as individualistic as natural rights per se, you get a lot of the Calvinist ideals with the elect and the need that you need to work hard, whereas opposed to with civic virtue, you're working squarely for the good of the community, not for your own place in heaven.
Also, classical republican can be seen through things such as Marxism, which are completely anti-religious.
At the state competition, we're going to be facing schools that have 3,000 students. You have a school yourself that has 1,600 students. You'll also be facing two schools that have under a population of 100 in terms of incline, or close to, and under 300. What are the advantages and disadvantages of going to a school that have either that such mass size or such small size?
The advantage of going to a school that has a smaller size is that perhaps you get more individualized education, so you certainly get more the concept that you're morally educating from a classical Republican standpoint better. As Thomas Jefferson said, a democracy cannot exist, cannot be both free and ignorant, and so having a smaller school definitely applies to that because you're able to educate your students a lot better.
Also, when we're considering things like we the people, if you consider a colonial government where the legislator was so close to constituents, you might compare that to a we the people teacher, how he's so close to his students because Incline has 300 students. Those students probably know each other very, very well, known each other for a long time, so they may have a better understanding of each other, maybe a better understanding of clicking within a group, but I also think that we also have that ability, just maybe in a smaller class size.
In a smaller institution like Green Ohio, or a really small, a larger institution, the larger student body means that there's going to be more diversity, and so you have the option to find more different types of people with different beliefs and different backgrounds within that group.
What moral education have you guys received here at Reno High School?
There's some moral education. For example, I mean, even if you're moving with the people classes, there's some moral education that comes into play. There's the honors code that was instituted, and there's a lot of extracurricular activities that sort of apply this concept of classical Republican moral education. Participating in sports, theoretically you have to uphold a 2.0 or higher, and you have to, not get suspended for doing stuff that's bad.
Also, being a freshman mentor, you're not only paying attention to your freshmen's academics, but also trying to understand them as a person and make them a better person. And so that could show how the school is trying to institute some kind of moral just helping the students become more moral.
Another issue that has these sort of moral connotations is cheating in schools, because a lot of people try to cheat and we're told not to, but this brings up the idea of enlightened self-interest, that really when you do cheat, you're just setting yourself up for maybe a situation or a challenge that you're really not ready for. And if you miss out on your education, you're really only wasting your own time.
Also, we could learn maybe civic virtue in the fact that kids who fail classes get to go to Plato to make them up, and they're given second chances, so that the whole school is better ranking in the long run.
With both of these ideas that have been discussed, natural rights and classical republicanism, which one better hits home with the whole moral education and civic virtue? Which one better emphasizes the properties behind those ideas?
Definitely, I would say classical republicanism more emphasizes moral education and civic virtue. When we look at classical republican societies like 5th century Athens under Pericles, he definitely, education was instituted for all boys from a very early age and trained them to serve in their military and to serve in other offices in the state by teaching them things like philosophy. They also had very progressive social institutions for their time, helping people make sure economic issues were no barrier to political participation.
Also, in these societies, the family was usually the foundation for your morality, and so in this classical republican concept, it really, really helps to.
I would actually differ with both Taylor and Alex, because under natural rights, you get this very important concept of tabula rasa, blank slate, and John Locke emphasizes this when he said, in our quote, "Of all men we met with, 9 parts out of 10 are what they are by their education." So I think that through natural rights and the fact that you are this blank slate, you're able to set up more that you need this moral education, because if you don't, then who are you going to become? So it's more important.
Do you believe in the concept of bilingual education?
I do. I think that it certainly teaches kids sort of to be civic virtue, not only from the fact that you're still in school and whatnot, but that fact that you're becoming a world citizen, and that's teaching you of other cultures, and that's not teaching you a civic virtue of a specific nation per se, but it's a civic virtue as a citizen of the world.
I agree with my colleague, especially considering places like Denmark who have 4 different languages, and it's required in one language that they speak. It's required that they learn French, even if their home language is Danish. And so, not Denmark, but
It's okay.
okay, and so this is a form of civic virtue because you're willing to understand a language fully in order the community can function better.
Good. We'll stop there.
Were you an 11 inch, Carl?